Well, good afternoon, everyone. Not sure this is on. Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly Hyde Park's honor to welcome the wonderful Congressman Delgado, as well as all of you to Hyde Park Town Hall. And I don't think he needs any further introduction than that.
Thank you, Aileen. Check, can you hear me? Does this work?
Yes.
It does? Yes. Should I use it? Yes. All right, good. Thank you, Aileen. I also want to recognize a couple other electeds. David Ray, Town Council, thank you. Where's David? Over here. There you go. Thank you. As well as Neil Krupwich, another councilman. Neil? Krupnick. Neil. It's good to be here. This is my first town hall of 2020. My 34th since being sworn in what feels like about 10 years ago. And I'm proud of the fact this is my fourth town hall in Dutchess County. We have made it a point to get everywhere in this district. It's a big one, as I'm sure you all are aware of, 11 counties. And getting out there in the district, connecting with folks, hearing from you directly, is how I feel like I could do my job to the best of my abilities. It's how I understand the needs of the communities all across the district. It's how I can thread together the different dynamics and what are the common issues that we are confronting as a district, particularly a district as politically diverse as this one, where you have a third independent, a third Democrat, and a third Republican. I could tell you that one of the things that's been most important to me is making sure that the people on the ground feel connected to me and feel connected to the work that I'm doing. In the case where that is not the situation, people begin to question whether or not democracy can work. People begin to question whether or not our system of checks and balances is legitimate. And for me, that is a mortal threat to who we are as a country. So I feel as though I'm on the front lines making sure that we are continually pushing and cultivating the garden of democracy. And that means you and I creating a feedback loop so that when I go back to DC, I'm not just speaking on what I think we should be doing. I'm speaking on behalf of the community that put me there in the first place. Now, I want to say, one of the things that I've tried to do over the course of the work that I've done is make sure that all of my legislation reflects what I'm hearing from the community. And that, again, is not just about the town halls. We have 4 locally based advisory groups, bipartisan: ag, healthcare, small business, and veterans. These are individuals from all parts of the district who I meet with. In fact, in my first in-district work week of this year, I made a point to meet with every single local advisory group at the top of the year to get a sense of what are the needs all across the district for these 4 subject matters. We have district offices in 5 parts of the district, 5 different offices, and mobile office hours to make sure that we are connecting with folks in every way. Because I can tell you, when I go to DC, it's a mess. It's very divided, it's very chaotic, it's very disorienting, very. And if you're not able to ground yourself in your district and in the needs of your district, you can certainly get wrapped up in that chaos. And you can certainly forget what got you there in the first place and who put you there in the first place. And I don't want to forget that. Now, we had a pretty eventful week. We had, it was eventful. The State of the Union. I want to first just stress that I was able to bring Chief Peter Volkman from Chatham up in Columbia County. Great man. He has done a lot of work around opioids and thinking through the ways we can destigmatize and decriminalize the disease that is addiction. He has a program that opens up the police department to those struggling with substance abuse and redirects them to treatment centers. It's a very positive, very compassionate program that I think we should be modeling out across the country. So bringing him was a way for me to highlight this issue and to make sure that the administration and my colleagues know how important this issue is. I have a bill that I introduced called the Mainstream Addiction Treatment Act, which would do away with the special waiver requirement to enable folks to prescribe medications to treat addiction, including buprenorphine and Suboxone. By the way, there are no special waiver requirements to prescribe the highly addictive opioids. How we get there? You can guess. So making sure that we work on that type of dynamic is of critical importance to me. The president flagged opioids. He mentioned in his speech that there's been a decline in overdoses. Now, maybe that's the case nationwide, but I can tell you in Dutchess and in Ulster and other parts of this district, we have seen dramatic increases in overdoses. And so as far as I'm concerned, there is a tremendous amount of work left to do in this space. A few other things the president highlighted that I was happy to hear. The president spoke about the cost of prescription drugs and how we have to bring down those costs. Now, I'm not sure if any of you folks were watching the State of the Union, but there was a call to vote for H.R. 3 in response to the president flagging prescription drugs. H.R. 3, which I am a wholehearted supporter of, allows for Medicare to have negotiating power with the pharmaceutical industry. Big deal. And we need to get that done. And the House actually passed it. So now it's up to the Senate to get it done. Happily, I have a bill, a part of H.R. 3, for my seniors here. Right now, if you have retirement accounts, that counts against you for your eligibility for subsidies for access to Medicare prescription drugs. So that hard-earned money that you put away now counts against you for eligibility to get assistance for paying down your prescription drugs. My bill, a part of H.R. 3, does away with that, so that now you don't have to get double-dipped or double-taxed, if you will, when it comes to affording your prescription drugs. The president also talked about rural broadband. Did you hear that? I heard it. I perked up. Because if you've been watching what I've been doing, it's a big issue for me. It's a big issue for our district. Every single county that I'm in, almost to a T, is struggling with this issue. And it is one of the most important issues that I can think of in terms of sustainability of our rural way of life, sustainability of economic growth. You cannot access the marketplace without quality, high-speed broadband. Our young people cannot download their homework and remain competitive in this marketplace without broadband. We cannot perform telemedicine without broadband. There's so many things that we need broadband for in the 21st century. We are living in the information age. There are too many of us off the information highway. And so for me, making sure that we are addressing this from the mapping standpoint, no more census block mapping, making sure that we actually have street level analysis so that our rural communities are actually identified and accounted for. Because right now, one block or one house in a whole block, if that house is covered, everybody in that block is thought to be covered. That only makes sense if you live in urban areas and everybody's on top of each other. Not in rural areas, we live miles and miles and miles apart. But this is the problem right now with how our government is working. It works like a capital investor. See, the capital investor, which I have no gripe with, thinks to themselves, where is the highest demand? Where can I get the highest return on my investment? Well, where you have dense populations. That's why we don't have the broadband, the quality cell service, because the incentive for private actors to invest here is not as high as it would be in other parts of the country. When the government begins to act like that, we have a problem. When the government forgets that its main job is to promote the general welfare, to protect and defend the public good, we have a problem. And that is our problem here in our community. This is the third most rural seat of any Democrat in Congress and the 8th most rural seat in the entire country. Right here in New York. Yes, we are more than the Big Apple, I can tell you that, okay? So, that's important, and we're getting left behind as a result. That's why we have to step up and invest our dollars in infrastructure, invest our dollars in public works, invest our dollars in education, That's where we get a return on our investment. The government has a role to play, either through public-private partnerships or on its own accord with our hard-earned tax dollars that we are now seeing being given away to corporations that don't need it. That is the real issue on our hands. The other piece that the president talked about that I thought was useful was just infrastructure altogether. From roads to rail, public transportation, we again have got to make sure that when it gets back to getting folks working again, this is the work we need to do. Put our money into our future, not to those who don't need it. Making sure that we are rebuilding our roads, our water infrastructure, our waste management systems, upgrading everything that we have around us into the 21st century is how we create good paying, sustainable jobs. And we get folks that education that they need to take on these jobs. My bill, the Rebuild Rural America Act, creates a $50 billion block multi-year grant that is only available to rural communities. Right now, a lot of our communities are competing with these very densely populated urban areas. We don't have the lobbyists. We don't have all the lawyers to send to DC. So we need our own bucket of money to be able to access. And this money, by the way, would skip the state and go right down to the county and town level. So you can do what you need to do with it. Now, I could keep going about State of the Union, but I want to push through and I want to answer. I've got a big crowd here today, so I want to make sure I take your questions. Second point I want to just speak to, the president, obviously the Senate trial concluded and the president was acquitted. From my position on this, what I was doing before the president was acquitted, I'm going to keep doing after. And what I was doing before the president was acquitted was everything I just explained, which is working for you and pursuing legislation. I'm not thrilled with the outcome, but I also know that my job is to continue to do the work for everybody in this district. My job is to represent your interests. My job is to pick up exactly where I left off in 2019. So let me recap just for a second. We have 31 bills that we were able to introduce between January of last year and February of this year. 31. 19 of those bills are bipartisan bills. 19. 9 of those bills passed the House and 2 were signed into law. Now there are 435 members of Congress. Now there are 435 members. 6 can say that they've had 2 or more laws signed into law in 2019. I am one of those 6. Thank you. A couple of highlights. Our farm bill was signed by the president, Family Farm Relief Act. This is for our small family farms who are struggling with this down farm economy, exacerbated by, I would argue, the president's reckless tariff policy. And we had to create a way to make sure that our farmers can get relief and remain operational. We lifted the cap on Chapter 12 bankruptcy from $3 million to $10 million, allowing more and more of our farmers to refinance and reorganize and hopefully come out on the other side of that process better for it. So our Family Farm Relief Act. I know I'm in Dutchess County. I want to say the other bill that I got signed into law is the post office renaming for the late Shannon Kent, Chief Petty Officer Shannon Kent, who we lost in Syria tragically, to a suicide bomber in her 5th deployment to the Middle East. We were happy to be able to get the Pine Plains Post Office renamed in her honor, and there'll be a ceremony later this year. One of those things for me as a new member, one of the most affecting experiences that I've had as a member, and understanding the magnitude of the seat and the sacrifice that so many of our service members are engaging with and putting their families in the line for our benefit. So that was a big deal for me and obviously for the family there. Medicare Ex-Choice Act, public option. I talked about it a lot. I'm happy we got it done. We're up to about, I think, 30 or 40 co-sponsors. I can talk more about that if you have more questions. Green Jobs and Opportunities Act. This allows us to create a pilot program to invest in community colleges to create jobs for those individuals that we know we need to train to fill the marketplace to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. That is what we do in terms of targeting our future and dealing with the green jobs economy in a practical and thoughtful way. I'm going to stop there because I can see this room is ready to ask some questions. But I just want to share with you a little bit about the work that I've been doing, I know there's a lot going on. And I know that this is going to be a difficult year for the country. And I view my role in all of this to be present, to be here, and to be accountable to you, everybody in this room, irrespective of party affiliation, to make sure you understand that I'm here to work, and I'm going to keep working as long as you allow me to work here. So only one rule. If you raise your hand, please just have a question. Sometimes folks give monologues. I just did that. So we're good on the monologues. Yes?
I wanted to ask you about climate change, and we know what the president's side has to say about it, but what is the, are there any introduced bills that are going to help us begin to address climate change as a country?
Yeah, well, first of all, pulling out of the Paris Agreement, was an incredibly disappointing and reckless, I should say, decision. We have passed legislation that would get us back into the Paris Agreement. Obviously, in order for it to be effective, we have to have a cooperating Senate, which is a challenge. The fact is, we have a crisis on our hands. Whether it's the raging wildfires, whether it's the rising sea tides, whether it's the extreme weather events that are happening now, the clip that's not extreme anymore is normal, the lack of really any seasons, the farmers that I'm talking to, the health of the soil, the increased Lyme disease, I mean, it's running rampant. Meanwhile, we have a president that's rolled back now at least 100 air and water regulations to protect our air and our water. We have an EPA whose mission, by the way, is to protect the environment, completely dedicated to undermining the environment. We have allowed for drilling in protected lands. We've rolled back carbon emissions for coal factories. We've rolled back fuel efficiency standards under the Obama administration. This president is not just denying the science, he's exacerbating the problem. He's throwing gasoline on the flame. It's an emergency. Now, as I said, I have introduced the Green Jobs Opportunity Act, which would, working off the idea that we have to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, figure out what the jobs are we have to create and fill to get there, And once we have that information through a Department of Labor study, we can then have pilot programs investing in community colleges, high schools, middle schools, training our young people for these exact jobs. The other big thing, we have got to stop propping up the fossil fuel industry, period. We don't need to give them the tax credits and the subsidies. They need to stop. They're doing just fine all by themselves. They are making record profits. Why are we helping them do that? We need to be taking those tax credits and all of those subsidies and shifting them over to the renewable energy space and invest in solar and wind and geothermal and make sure that we are investing in our future. By the way, it's not just about protecting our environment, which is big enough, but that's where the economic growth lies too. All of the job prospects are in that space, and we are not doing enough to make sure that we're getting in front of it. We could be incentivizing our farmers, by the way, to take on technology like carbon capture technology or sequestration technology. There's so much we could be doing to incentivize private actors to be a part of the fight to take on climate change. And right now, we're not doing any of that.
What is the status of your bill right now in Congress?
Well, we're building support. We have, I think, I want to say almost 50 co-sponsors. Mm-hmm. This is a big bill because one of the things I learned in Congress is, there's a lot of hoops you got to go through, particularly if you're a lowly first-year member of Congress. And trying to partner up with individuals who are on different committees and who are chairmen or women of different committees, it's actually, while difficult, it is an important piece to success. And this is one of those bills where I didn't just want to have some messaging symbolic bill. I wanted to have a bill that I think over time could really build some steam. I wanted to get labor buy-in. I wanted to get environmental buy-in. So I had to make sure I identified a few individuals in these spaces who could really help usher this thing through. And we found those individuals, and we have found a lot of success. And we're up to about 50, I would say, I think at this point, co-sponsors. So again, we're going to keep pushing the bill. I think it's a smart, practical idea. And we'll see if it can get through, or at least get a vote on the House floor. I'm certainly, every chance I get, speaking to leadership about it, and I'm going to keep doing that. Hopefully we'll get a vote.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to keep it short and brief because of time. first thing you mentioned, addictions. Since I worked in the field over 12 years, a lot of time these individuals that are addicted to drugs, they want to continue with their life, but they have the roadblock. Once they challenge, go to a halfway house, do their drug treatment, residential treatment, go to a halfway house. Now they have all this time on their hands because their inability to get jobs. Why can't some type of deal be tied on? Well, these individuals that come out of treatment and still doing the aftercare can have an opportunity to work because too much time on your hand, as we call it, is dead time, devil's playground.
Absolutely.
So they want to relapse.
Yep.
There's nothing to cover that.
No, you're absolutely right.
Second thing, before you go into that, these bills, since we under this payback president, how's the Democrat is going to get these bills passed when you're just sitting on the desk and not benefiting the people, the country? How are you going to maneuver through that?
Right.
And final.
Oh, okay. All right. That was very smooth. He keeps sliding in.
Social Security.
Okay.
I mean, so much about Social Security cut. Congress is not giving me nothing. I've been working since I was 14 years old. This is my money that I put into it. It's not nothing that you guys are giving us.
Absolutely.
Why are you messing with our Social Security benefits?
So I'm not messing with them, but so I'm gonna try to run through the 3 points. First, on those who are struggling with substance abuse and reintegration, it's such an important piece. You know, we don't do enough to invest in the programming that is meant to reconnect folks in, not just the programming from a job standpoint, but from a housing standpoint too, right? And making sure that folks are anchoring themselves in the community. I was over at Catholic Charities some months ago. I had a whole week on opioids, and I brought panelists together from different spaces who were thinking about all the ways we can create opportunities to reintegrate folks and empower them. And that does take some programming at the top, right? At the federal level, it takes real investment dollars, and we're not putting any money right now, both into the reintegration piece, but also into the preventative piece as well. We're just really sort of putting a Band-Aid over this problem and not doing anything in a meaningful way. I just got a bill that I introduced this year called the Career Opportunities or Gateway to Career Act. And this bill focuses on ways in which that we can have grant programs that go to community colleges or career technical schools for the purpose of wraparound services. Included in that would not just be childcare, would not just be transportation, but treatment, right? To make sure that those who are working, who are on their feet, who are trying to go about their business, have the support that they need through these kind of grant programs to facilitate the work that they're doing and to stay productive along the way. So I'm mindful of this, and I want to keep focusing on it. It's a big issue. Gridlock, dysfunction.
Stop.
Yeah.
Go back to after they complete treatment, after they complete, it's set up to aftercare. There's no work for, and I see so many young people come through addiction, come through completing residential treatment, get their aftercare set up. They have no jobs for them to continue on, which is good for the ego and good for the image and good to.
I totally agree. And I think the way we can do that is by investing in the kind of programs that I'm talking about that create these opportunities, and also investing in peer-to-peer groups, which are designed to help facilitate and identify where those opportunities might be. Because sometimes it's hard to figure out where they might be if they are there in the first place. And you have to have a community that can work together and say, okay, here's what we've identified within our immediate location or in our neighboring locations, and have a sort of group that you can lean on and rely upon to place you in different parts of your community as far as work goes. But it is not a easy solution. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. I want to try to get through all three of your questions, okay? Gridlock and dysfunction. Listen, the problem is we have a divided government. This is how the system works. You know, I would suspect the founding fathers would hope that we get our stuff together and figure out in a divided government how to compromise, how to do a little give and take. For me, as someone who's introduced 31 bills, 19 are bipartisan, 2 that I've signed and been by the president, what I've tried to do is identify where there is common ground. I lead from that place. I don't lead from the place of, here's what I believe in my heart of hearts, and I'm not going to get off this block. That's it. That's where I'm only going to stay. I lead from the place of, where is there common ground? Where is there an opportunity for us to agree? That's where I lead from. I look at my district. I see it's very rural. I know there are a lot of Republicans all across this country that represent rural districts. Common ground. They have a lot of farmers. Common ground. They might need rural broadband. Common ground. They might have opioid addiction problems. Common ground. And then you chase these opportunities tirelessly. And you make friends across the aisle. And you talk. And you run your committee. And you engage with the chair, Democrat or Republican. And you figure out how to get it done. So that's how. I mean, there's no way around it. There's no easy answer. You just got to work and be committed to finding answers that are about the common ground. And do not fall for the divisive rhetoric. Don't fall for that. You just stay focused on what's in front of you and the common ground. Lastly, Social Security. By, I think, 2023, I believe, only about 77% of the benefits will get paid out. You won't get 100% based on the track that we're on right now. We will need a solution. We will need a solution. One of the things that no one's talking about, or a few folks are talking about, but not enough, is we have had tremendous runaway income inequality for decades. Now we're at some of the highest we've seen ever. And a lot of the wealth in this country is being captured at the top. So when you're thinking about when the cap initially was set, it captured almost, I think, 90% of all income in this country. But because now so much of the income is being generated at the top, it's not capturing nearly as much. Not to mention we have the older generation, boomers are now retiring, right? So it's putting downward pressure on the entire system, and we have not made the adjustment. Why is it if you make $40,000, you get 100% of your income taxed? All 100% at 6%. If you make $10 million, how much of your income is actually being taxed? I mean, not even, like less than 1%, right? So why are we thinking about ways in which we can ensure that the folks who are making 10, 15, $20 million have to pay a little bit more? Bump that cap up for them and make sure that we can extend the life of Social Security. And that accounts for the fact that wealth now is being constantly trapped at the top. 0.1% of this country, by the way, 0.1%. 0.1, a fifth of all the wealth. Top 1% owns 29% of all the wealth. So all that money is up there. And if we are having a cap that doesn't capture enough of that money, this is the dilemma we find ourselves in. So we got to make sure we have real solutions to this problem. Okay. Yes, I want to make sure. Yes.
I'm here on behalf of my grandfather. He's 90 years old. He has lived in Poughkeepsie, Hyde Park his whole life, and he's a Korean War veteran. In November, he fell and broke his hip, went through surgeries. He went to the Lutheran Care Center in Poughkeepsie for his rehab, and was sent home. The doctor there said that he needed full-time health care at home,
Yes.
full-time physical therapy, and he has not been allowed to receive any of that through Medicare. The VA, because he's a veteran, approved him for, I think it was 13 hours a week, but other than that, they haven't approved any, and they had said that if he had Medicaid, that he would have been able to get
Yes.
more, but he doesn't have that,
Yes.
so,
This is a big issue.
yeah.
So this is the issue you're speaking to, and it's a shame that unfortunately the VA is not able to fill this need,
Yeah.
which is a different element than what is typically the case for a lot of folks, I think, who haven't served. So, but here's the situation. I just met with a bunch of caretakers and folks who were very committed to this in Kingston on this very issue. If you do not qualify for Medicaid, and you are not super wealthy, right? Those are your two, bookends, right? Super wealthy, Medicaid. There is literally nothing currently in our healthcare regime that helps you pay for or afford long-term home care. So if you're somebody, getting up in your age and you might just need somebody to help you around, joints or bones or whatever the case might be, or you might have an ailment that just requires you to have assistance to live out your life in the way that we all ought to be able to live it out, there's nothing for you. Unless you have the means to just hire somebody and pay an exorbitant amount of money, or you qualify for Medicaid. Problem is, that is a huge swath of the American population. We're talking millions upon millions upon millions of people who are at their wits' end, and it is a dire situation. So that meeting I had was about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And I went back to DC and literally sat down with my team and said, we've got to figure out what's going on in this space. What are the bills that we could try to maneuver through here? The fact that Medicare currently doesn't have anything that addresses this is a big deal. But it's not just that, it's vision, it's dental, right, hearing. How do we make sure that our Medicare system is bolstered? And what I'm hearing coming out of the administration and the Republican-controlled Senate, a little too much, is cuts to these kinds of programs. We should be thinking about ways to fortify them and make sure that we're covering folks who are falling into these gaps. And that's the real problem. So I hear you, and I'm working on it.
Okay.
Yes, in the back.
I'm
Good.
Jim Roder from Pleasant Valley.
How you doing, Jim?
I want to thank you first of all for the impromptu tickets and tour I got last year at the Capitol.
Excellent.
Anyone, feel free to call him last minute. He'll get the
I'll hook you up. I'll hook you up. We got a great team.
So I have an idea, if you don't have a pending 30-second bill that you want to propose yet, I want to jump on the young man's comment in front about Social Security, which I think everybody in this room has a concern about, and it's relevant to all of us here. So the Social Security Act, specifically Section 458, Title 4D, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. I did send you an email this morning. I'm not jumping at you for not responding yet, but
I try to be responsive, so.
you get a more detailed answer later. But the Social Security Act, Section 458, Title 4D, it allows states federal child support incentive payment share, and it's calculated according to a formula based on 5 measures that the states perform: maternity establishment, support order establishment, current support payments, cases paying towards arrears, and cost effectiveness. So basically, in layman's terms, there's dollar signs on kids' heads. So the more support orders are in effect, the more money the federal government gives to the states. To put that into perspective, fiscal year 2015, for example, the federal government paid out over $556 million to the 50 states, the territories, and Puerto Rico. New York State received over $31 million in incentive payments. So you said that there's a shortfall and people are only going to be collecting 70% or so. That's the reason why. So what I'm calling on you to do for your 30-second bill is to introduce legislation that will eliminate that, to stop funding the states with federal money. Everybody pays into Social Security, but the states are receiving that incentive kickback. And it's not just for child support, it's for foster families as well. It's in Section 4.
Okay. So I'm gonna look for your email, and I'm gonna read it, and I'm gonna make sure that I really understand everything you're laying on the table. Listen, I'm all about trying to figure out how to solve this issue. One of the things that that frustrates me about this issue and a lot of issues is people are afraid to offer solutions. You start talking about Medicare or Social Security, or, it's like people would rather just sort of talk in circles than say, here's what I would think we should do, right? I explained earlier what I think we should do. I gave a solution. Here's what I think. And you can judge it one way or the other, but it's a solution that I think I'm comfortable standing on. We have got to make sure that we are being more and more solutions-oriented, and that we're looking for ideas to solve these problems. So I will certainly take on that idea, look at it, and maybe we'll see if it's number 32.
Just one quick solution, though, is a presumption of equal shared parenting across the board, 50-50 in cases of divorce and split homes. Right now, the one parent is incentivized. It could be male or female, I'm not judging that way, but one parent is incentivized, and the courts and the social service programs are incentivized to pick a winner and a loser. So somebody gets that money, so that money comes from DC.
Got it.
So I'll be
Got
willing
it.
to work with you if you want.
We'll work. We'll work. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm a social studies teacher in a high school, and I really struggle with a lot of my students coming to school hungry on a regular basis.
Yes.
Not only the rollback of the SNAP benefits concerns me, but
Yeah.
also the fact that for a lot of our kids, particularly kids who have a single-parent household, the income threshold for qualifying for free and reduced lunch is incredibly low. For a lot of parents, they make too much money. If kids come to school hungry, they leave hungry. Can't get breakfast, can't get lunch if they don't have money in their pockets. So I'm hoping that you would be able to look at legislation that could help to address this issue.
I certainly am, and I'm looking at legislation right now. You can clap for that. I've been to, one of the highlights of this job is, and there's some highlights, but one of them I really enjoy is when I go to visit young people, high schools, middle schools, even down to elementary school. Wonderful children, bright-eyed, and just so more deserving than the support, particularly at the federal level. There's a couple of bills. One bill that's I'm looking at that would ensure that every elementary school kid gets a free breakfast and lunch when they get to school, which is very important. I don't know how you can come to school hungry and be expected to be able to focus. It's just, it defies logic. Anybody with kids knows, it's hard enough to deal with full kids. And to send kids to school who are hungry for the teacher and for those young kids, it's just not right. But here's the issue. This is the problem, right? You're talking about SNAP benefits being cut, and you're talking about the social safety net, in essence, is under assault. And what frustrates me, and this goes back to the conversation that I was making about the role of government and promoting the general welfare and public good. It is shrinking. That role is literally shrinking before our very eyes. And there is intense economic insecurity right now. We hear a lot about how this economy is great. We hear a lot about how the unemployment levels are really low and the stock market is just the best it's ever been. But if you look underneath the hood, it is a different story. It is a different story. You have 2/3 of this country living paycheck to paycheck. 2/3. The middle class is shrinking. The fastest growing class of people are the working poor. Those unemployment numbers, yes, they're high, they're low, but they're low because there's an increase right now. Millions and millions of more people are working part-time jobs. Millions and millions more people are working multiple jobs. That's what's under the hood. And so how we get to a point where we understand that this is the need we have to address, it's economic insecurity. Because at the same time, by the way, this economy is booming for some, wages aren't going anywhere. 0.8%, that's been the growth in wages since 2016. So when we're talking about how strong the economy is, all this growth, well, how come wages aren't keeping up with it? Why are they more or less flat during that same period of time? Meanwhile, the cost of healthcare goes up. The cost of housing goes up. Transportation goes up. Education goes up. Everything goes up except wages. That's why we support the PRO Act this week, to make sure that we protect collective bargaining, make sure that our unions can go in there and say, we deserve more. For a long time, this has been an assault on unions, and you better believe that there's a correlation between the dip in our wages and the fact that our unions aren't there. So this is a real issue. And one other piece on this, because it's not just economic insecurity, it's exacerbated when you look at the fact that the inequality now is through the roof. As I note, when you have 95% of the growth since the recession going to the top 1%, that's a problem that we haven't really corrected. Corporations right now are making the most profits they've ever made and paying the least in taxes they've ever made. Think about that. So I just laid out for you all the economic insecurity. And while that's happening all across this country, other story is corporations are doing just fine. In fact, they're doing the best they've ever done and being asked to give the least. To give the least. Right now, the corporate revenue share is about 7%. That's how much it makes of all revenue coming into the government. Go back 40 years ago, 50 years ago. It was at 33%. 33%. Down to 7. And then here's the last point I want to bring in on this. How does this all work out? Corruption. Because the more and more you squeeze people, and the more the wealth gets stuck at the top, and the more money dictates how Washington works, the less and less this looks like a democracy. The less and less we have access points to our elected officials. And rather than actually investing in infrastructure, investing in our young people, investing in education, we give it away. We give the money away and hope it somehow trickles down, when we know every single time it never does. Those tax breaks, they end up being stock buybacks. Last fact, before the tax bill, they told us it was going to increase capital investment. All this profit margin would be reinvested. This blows my mind. The numbers have made it clear. There was more capital investment before the tax bill was passed than there has been since. So the very rationale for the bill that created $1 trillion in deficit and gave us $22 trillion debt, the highest in this country's history, that rationale, meritless. Nothing to it. A ruse. That's where we are right now. So we got a lot of work to do. Yes, sir. Yeah, you.
I'm concerned about the weaponization of the federal government executive branch rulemaking against states like the great state of New York that did not vote to support the president in the last election. Two of the examples would be the cap on state tax deductibility, and then this past week, really a vindictive ruling that New Yorkers would no longer be able to enroll in expedited federal travel programs like Global Entry. And I'm wondering, how can the Congress, among other entities, I know Cuomo's trying to...
Right, well, we wrote a letter. I joined the letter of my New York delegation, with my New York delegation to the Department of Homeland, or DHS, to say, hey, can we get an explanation? This kind of came out of nowhere. We don't really, to the global entry point, what's the connection? How do we, what's the logic? What's the rationale? It seems a bit capricious, if not vindictive. So we need some answers. So we're on top of that, and we're going to keep, looking for answers. You raised the SALT cap, which to me, this is how the tax bill that I just laid out, which was disastrous. I want to be clear though, because this is what's so frustrating to me. There are pieces of the tax bill, whether it's increasing the earned income credit, whether it's allowing folks to depreciate their assets all 100% on the front end of their business. These are good pieces, right? So when I talk about the bill, I'm not saying that every single piece of the bill is bad, but the heart of the bill, right, the sort of thrust of the bill really comes down to a giant cut to the corporate rate without any strings attached, and it's permanent. And it was paid for in part by what you're talking about, the SALT cap. We're going to hit you harder now to pay for a permanent tax cut to corporations who've been already, the rate was 35 before the tax break, the average marginal rate they were paying was 18. 18. They were already paying 18 because of the lawyers and the loopholes and tax attorneys that they were able to hire to finagle it. So all we did was just make it sweeter for them. That's it. And so yes, I mean, we have a bill that we introduced to repeal that cap, at least temporarily. Hoping I think we introduced it. Actually, it's been introduced, and we're hopefully going to get it through the House. I mean, again, Senate is going to be the issue, right? As long as we're in this situation where we have the dynamics we have, we're going to have a hard time moving things through all the way to the president's desk. Yes. I'm sorry, so I see. I'm going to come back to you. Yes. I will do this. I'm going to do you, sir, then you, and then you. Okay?
I'm looking for a really good soundbite from you. We live in the richest country in the history of civilization. There's more wealth here than there ever was, and yet this man's students come to school hungry. This woman's grandfather, a veteran no less, he cannot find medical treatment. That gentleman is worried about his Social Security. say something about these elites who are undermining Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal and have been done it since 1980.
Well, we are in Hyde Park. So, you know, I think I have spoken on this a little bit.
Yeah. Let's hear a good one.
Listen, I don't want to, I want to make sure that, you know, I get to speak to different issues but I'll just say, this is the crux of the situation we find ourselves in today. As I alluded to early on, if we're trying to figure out how we got to a place where strongman politics is being more and more normalized, where demagoguing is becoming sort of the political methodology of assent, of political assent. The way it works is this. You create the illusion of scarcity. You tell people you have to fight for crumbs, okay? Even though there's a whole pie that you can have access to. And then you say the reason why you're fighting for crumbs is because of some person who doesn't look like you, or pray like you, or eat the same food you eat, or dress like you. And that can be effective when you're hungry, because it's human instinct to become tribal, right? It's human instinct to want to close ranks when you feel like you're fighting for crumbs. And so what ends up happening is you have individuals who see this. I'd argue individuals who don't have good intentions, who want to exploit it, who want to pit communities together, rather than pulling back the veil and saying, wait a second, we have more prosperity to share here. We could be investing more in our communities. We could be uplifting who we are from the ground up instead of waiting for it to trickle down. And as long as we are in this dynamic, our democracy is at stake, because people stop believing in collective determination. They stop believing that we're all connected, that our fates are united as one, and that the promise of this country, no matter your race, your class, your religion, your sexual orientation, that is not a limitation, that you have a way forward. You can access opportunity in this country no matter where you start. That is the desire, that's the hope, right? And right now, that is what's under siege, and in part because of grotesque levels of inequality. The legitimacy of democracy can be rendered illegitimate when faced with grotesque levels of inequality. That's when people start questioning it. How is it working? Can it work when it gets to that point? And at that point, when the doubt sets in, bad actors can exploit. Yes. Oh, sorry, yes.
Thank you for wonderful actions in the House.
Thank you.
Now, what we would like to know is your thoughts on what we can do to activate the Senate, because we have.
Call them up.
That there's nothing happening there.
You got to call them.
They don't let you.
You got to, I know. I know. Listen, here's the thing. It is frustrating. We've introduced over 300, 400 some odd bills, from Paycheck Fairness Act to Violence Against Women's Act to H.R. 8, Moms Demand Action, universal background checks. Universal background checks. 90% of the country says, yes, we like universal background checks. 90%. That's everybody, basically, right? I mean, what has to happen for 90% of the country to not get something done? I mean, I don't know if there's any more better example of how corrosive money in politics is. When you have 90% of the electorate saying we want something and we can't get it through to the president's desk. Yes, and that's the rules, right? We have rules in place in the Senate that allow one man to decide what goes to the floor. So my brother, who I love my brother, younger brother, since I've been involved in politics, he's gotten you know, as you might suspect, even more involved in politics and following things more and more. And he said to me once, he goes, I want to make sure I understand this right. And he said, you know, I've been watching, you know, there's bills that pass the House that pass on a bipartisan basis. Like, you know, you have majority, you got Republicans, Democrats, it passes. And you're telling me that even though it passed the House on a bipartisan basis, that there's no requirement for the folks in the Senate to at least put it to the floor for a vote? Even if it passes on a bipartisan basis? I said, I got one better for you. I got a bill that I introduced, Small Business Veterans Continuation Act, helps our spouses of disabled veterans. Before, you had a cap on disability for federal contractors, giving the credit to the spouses upon the veterans passing away. 100% had to be the disability rating. We said, no, come on. If you 80%, 70%, shouldn't matter. You should get that federal contracting preference. That bill passed the House. My bill passed the House unanimously. Unanimously. Not a single person in the entire House voted against it. You know what's going on right now in the Senate? Nothing. It's just sitting there. A bill that passes the House unanimously that's going to help our veterans and their families is just languishing away. Now, that's a horrible picture to have to process and accept. I think what we have to do is put more pressure on the system. And that means not just in terms of you know, letters and phone calls and, you know, obviously getting out there when it's time to vote, but it's also identifying the legislation that you know you need to get behind to make the change. So HR 1, for example, I would start with that one and rally around HR 1. This is real government reform, right? That puts power in the hands of the people. It takes money out of the system. It allows for independent commissions to draw congressional districts so that we don't have these super partisan dynamics and these super safe seats where people could just go to their corner and not have to really earn the support through compromise. That is the challenge, where we allow people of limited means to access the system, where we actually say it's a holiday on election day and everybody can go vote instead of trying to figure out how to get there. Where it's automatic voter registration. Automatic. Make it easier and easier for folks to vote. Now, is that going to be the cure-all? No, not the cure-all, but I do think the more and more we can get people engaged in the system, the more and more make it easier for folks who, by the way, are struggling to get by, working 2 jobs, part-times. They have to figure out a way. We have to figure out a way to make it easier for folks to take back the democracy and to engage. I think if we start there and get behind bills that do that, we can at least begin to mitigate what we're seeing and put more pressure on the folks in the Senate. I know you were the next person, sir.
We're just about out of time.
Okay, all right, we'll keep going. But yes, yes.
Thanks for taking my question.
Yes.
It's about the governor's proposal for that most recent budget to bring the Thruway Authority to take over the Bridge Authority. And people, I don't know if anybody realizes that all the money right now with the Bridge Authority stays with the Bridge Authority. It takes care of 5 bridges up and down the river. And if this money goes to the Thruway, if the governor gets his wish, all this money leaves the Hudson Valley. Everything goes basically to a bridge that we built in Nyack with no financial plan, and up to, let's just say, through Albany, Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, outside of the Hudson Valley. Tolls will immediately double, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I kind of think the Hudson Valley residents and small businesses, big businesses, kind of need to know this, because the bill, you just put it in the bill, and we have until April 1st for hopefully Congress, somebody can work to get it out. Because it's not so much about the possible jobs that could be lost, the union infighting that will happen, it's about the community that's going to lose the money to pay for financial happenings that had nothing to do with us.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, so we're all on the same page. You know, this is the state budget, you know, which is different than the federal budget. I certainly, as a New Yorker, right, care about the state budget, but as an elected official in the federal position, there's nothing I can really do about the state budget, right? That's not my purview, not my jurisdiction. I do think, though, that what I can tease out of your question or out of your point is that, and I alluded to this earlier on when I talked about, New York being more than the Big Apple, right? I think there's a host of issues when we're talking about the way funding is allocated that time and time again don't seem to square with or create the right proportionality when it comes to supporting our way of life here in upstate New York. And that is a problem. Whether that's how we manage even the reservoir system and making sure that while we certainly filter the water out for the good folks down in New York City, that we're not doing ourselves harm in the process by overcompensating, right? And so you have to have people in these seats, at all seats of government, that are mindful of not just the dynamics downstate, but the dynamics upstate. Again, the third most rural seat of any Democrat in Congress and the 8th in the entire country. So when we're talking about how we are going to support economic growth all throughout the state of New York, we got to be thinking about the impact that's going to have on our rural way of life and how we can create investment dollars here and make it easier for folks to have a life here and not feel the burden, whether it's a tax burden or whether it's the way we pay for our benefits here. Whatever the case might be, we have got to get to a place where we're facilitating that in a way that is more proportionate and fair to the community here in upstate New York. Yes?
I have a totally different topic for you.
Okay, good.
2 years ago, okay?
Yes.
Still say that. About 2 years ago, I think it was May or June of 2018, there was a bill, I believe it was numbered HR 962. It was the Babies Born Alive Protection Act. And we got, just 5 of my friends and I, we got over 400 signatures on a petition that we wrote to you. We delivered it to your fella. I don't know what his, I don't see him here. He was in the library. You never even responded. It was 400 people who went out of there. It was 5 people who spent a lot of time getting the signatures. We were urging you to vote to allow that bill to come to the floor. And you voted not to even allow it to be voted on. So my question is, why would someone, and I trust you, I think that you are an honest person. I've never heard you speak before, but I think you're an honest person. But you stand up there and you say you want to be here for us. But my goodness, babies born alive from botched abortions, and you didn't want it to come to a vote on the floor?
Well, let me just say.
Explain that, because that is just,
Wow.
that was just heartbreaking.
I certainly will explain. I appreciate your question. I'll say this. On the piece first about just being responsive, you better believe that I'm going to go back to my team after this and figure out if there was a breakdown, where it happened. Because I take a lot of pride in making sure that I'm incredibly responsive to everybody that approaches me, no matter what the issue is, and that you at least walk away from the experience feeling like you got a chance to be heard. So, we'll figure that out. On the question of, well, let me just start by saying this. I am pro-choice. So when, But I just want to, that was just the first line. I have a few.
That's equal to infanticide.
I just want to, the reason why I started this, I just want to make sure that you understand sort of how I'm orienting myself on the issue.
Yeah,
Okay?
I realize that you were pro-choice.
Okay, good. So I'm also a man of faith. And, when you look at the law of the land, and you look at Roe v. Wade, you look at what it tries to do in balancing the moral questions that are at play in this dynamic, along with the rights of a woman to make her own health choices. I believe that allowing the states, as the law does currently, to regulate the choice without unduly burdening the woman to the point of viability, 24 weeks, as under the law, is the current law of the land. Beyond that, and it's important to note, 99% of all abortions are happening before the 20th week. 99%. So that leaves about 1%.
1% of.
So I'm not denying that.
We were
But
talking about babies who are born alive from a botched abortion. That's what we're talking about.
right, but what I'm talking
Live babies.
what I'm talking about Because there's a lot of ways in which we have to get on the same page before we just start talking about the dynamics. I need you to understand how I'm orienting myself on this issue. And you could fit your point into that, and you know, that's how, without having the dynamic where we're talking past each other, right? So my point is, there are going to be situations, and as somebody who you know, has a community of young adult friends who've you know, had all types of different dynamics with kids and children, and one of the things that I think we have to get our minds wrapped around is that when people are making decisions late in their pregnancy, it is a brutally difficult situation many times because there's something really wrong that is putting either that mother's life on the line, that child's life on the line, and to politicize that dynamic or to belittle it or to cast judgment on that individual without actually being in that individual's shoes or that family's shoes, which I find a lot of the rhetoric around this issue boils down to, without any disrespect for folks who have moral sensibilities on this. I think it's just important that we cast a fair net on this issue and be thoughtful in how we talk about it. So when you frame the question in the way you do, I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing, and that we're talking about the situations that we're trying to protect in terms of the health and the lives of the women who are giving birth to children, and the dynamics that are in play there, and that woman's choice and that family's choice to go through that process. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, I understand what you're saying completely. We're talking about a baby that's born alive and no longer within the womb, okay?
So then what is I'm not following you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. The legislation would allow or require that doctors take care of babies who are born alive from botched abortions.
How many botched?
I don't,
I'm
but
sorry.
I'm sorry. Here's what I'm gonna do, because I don't quite.
But to not even allow them to come to vote for the.
But I guess what I'm trying to understand is I don't. And again, we could talk more about this, and I'll follow up with you. But I just don't quite understand the situation you're explaining. I just don't. I'm not. And maybe that's partly why. Let me go back and talk to you, because I just don't quite know, and I don't want to talk about something where we're not really on the same page.
You seem like you're a person who would like more information.
Yeah, let me follow up.
With all the right information.
Yes, I appreciate that, and I'll follow up. Let's make sure we follow up. Yes.
How you doing? I'm
Good.
actually perfectly glad you brought up a couple topics right now about this subject, and it's actually perfect. It's my body, my choice, and everyone's clapping and sharing their hands. I'm in a situation where my kids were kicked out of school because of my religious beliefs, and what I want to come to the public about this too, because it's interesting, like this gentleman right here, my children aren't vaccinated, so they're either forced to go to vaccinate or get kicked out of school. So a couple interesting topics here, because I've talked to many people about this, and most people think vaccinations are great, you're crazy if you don't do it, but let's put that to the side right now. Let's talk about the subject of the government deciding what goes into your body, okay? That's a big subject. You know, the vaccine debate is not that complex. Either you believe that the government should have full control of what is injected into you and your children, or you don't. And I want to talk about this subject specifically because my children were kicked out of school. Meanwhile, this high school teacher right here, he is just as unvaccinated as my child, right? Who here has had a booster shot within the last 7 to 10 years? Right? You've had a booster shot of PPT, MMR. You know what? The stats are, the statistics.
All right. So let me rein this in. I understand your point of view, sir, and this is a tough conversation, a delicate one. But you know, here's the thing. There are.
Right. That's the question here. So the government does have the right.
Again, wait. Let me just say this. Here's the thing. We have a community of folks, right? We send our kids to playgrounds and schools and.
Yeah, like my kids still go to, by the way. Go ahead.
Right. So at a certain point, there's a role where the public safety comes into play. right? The public safety. And there will be times where, the public safety is going to supersede, the individual desires, right? Right. So okay. So then, what is the?
How many times they put in place? And let's talk about the measles here. The measles doesn't even make that list, by the way. The measles.
But listen, I'll just say this: we can go back and forth about which set of things, and I'm happy to do that, one-on-one with you, with my team. I think the main issue here, though, and I think it's one that I want to make clear, is that we have to balance out the public safety piece here, and we have to understand how we do that balance the right way. And that's it. And I'm happy to figure out with you what you think that appropriate balance is, but as long as we can agree that there must be some type of balancing that occurs, we at least have some common ground. All right. All right, so I'm going to do a couple more questions. Okay, we got it. All right, how about we do 3? Okay, we'll do this gentleman, you, and then where are you pointing? Right here. All right, so we're going to go 1, 2, and then 3. Yes, sir.
I'm going to steer away from the third rail for a minute.
What third? Which one?
Both of them. So I teach at the culinary down the road. And my students graduate, the majority of them graduate with stultifying student debt.
Oh, yes.
And when I graduated, I paid 30 some odd years ago, I paid for it myself.
Yeah.
Just by being able to work, and I was done in a couple of years. And the problem with student debt, obviously, is it's also making higher education less attractive.
Yeah.
And there's been plenty of articles about the worth of higher education, and always in that milieu is the student debt. And I know it's partly my fault because I'm a boomer, and our health costs are subsuming the money that would be going to education. What's going on in Congress and, well, the Senate about?
Yeah, so education, the cost of higher learning is skyrocketing. And this goes back to my earlier point about the profiteering of what traditionally has been deemed public goods. So education should be viewed as a public good. Not to say that we can't have private, actors within the space, but when it gets to a point where everything is operated based on that premise, where interest rates, for example, are charged while students are in college, which was not the case when I was in school, where the rates now are 6, 7, 8 percentage points above the Treasury rate, which was not the case when I was in school. All of this in the name of profits, right? And so I'm a big believer in making sure that we roll back and require more guidelines on what can be charged and for what purpose. I also think that just charging interest as a starter while kids are in college is backwards, and we should go back to the way we had it. I think the other piece of this is when we're talking about all these young people who have been hit hard by this debt, we should be thinking through a loan forgiveness program, ensuring that we are figuring out creative ways to get young people to do service. Whether it's Teach for America, whether it's the Peace Corps, whether it's joining the military, whatever the case might be, whether it's coming to work at a nursery home or a treatment addiction clinic in a rural community for a year or two. Create creative ways to enable our young people to get themselves back on their feet while serving the community around them. I think that would be another big piece for loan forgiveness. The last piece on this, we are operating under the same model. We think that everybody should go to a 4-year college. We got real excited about that when I was coming of age. I was that kid that grew up in a working class household where my parents talked about education being the gateway to opportunity, the great equalizer, and I still believe in it. But I was also raised at a time where you had to go get a 4-year college education. That was sort of the North Star. Everybody has to go get a 4-year, because at that point we hadn't had the sort of expansion of the global marketplace. The internet was just coming into vogue, right? We didn't have these international trade deals that were soaking jobs away and manufacturing jobs away from our shores. And all that changed, but we didn't in terms of how we think about education. We stopped investing in vocational schools and trade schools and apprenticeship programs, and we never figured out, wait a second, the world has changed, and we haven't caught up with it. So we got to figure out how to go back to that. And that's why the program I talked about earlier, the Gateway to Careers Act does exactly that, investing in those types of career technical schools with wraparound programs that makes it easy for our young people to actually do this work. Lastly, the Strengthening Financial Aid Act, a bill I introduced, that gets us back to putting more money into Pell Grants. More money into Pell Grants. Right now, Pell Grants only pay for about 30% of a four-year college education. Again, and I sound like I'm like, an older individual, but back when I was growing up, it was 70% of a four-year college education. So we've come a long way in the wrong direction on this issue. So a big believer in this, and I'm working on it.
And we're a great school, so.
There you go. And we need a lot more of you. Yes?
This also relates to our future generation, and this is a bipartisan issue and a bipartisan disaster. 54% of our children have a chronic condition, a pre-existing condition.
Yeah.
1 in 38 in some places have autism. Special ed budgets are up to 25%. No one has done anything to reverse this curve since the 80s. Is there any hope for our
Well, there's always hope. There is always hope. No, seriously, there's always hope, and the hope is obviously here in the room with all of you being engaged and caring about the future and caring about young people. But yes, the sad reality is we are leaving the most vulnerable amongst us behind. And it's devastating when you see it firsthand. We have too many folks, young people, struggling with mental ailments, physical ailments, and there's no thought going into how we protect this community whatsoever. In fact, we are assaulting the programs and cutting the programs. Listen, we have about a $4.7 trillion budget, okay, around that. A lot of it's mandatory, so you got Medicare, you got Medicaid, Social Security. Then you get to discretionary spending. You look at the numbers, that go towards education. You look at the numbers that go towards, housing, the numbers that go towards the kind of program you're talking about, right? I mean, it's minuscule. We're talking maybe 30, billion there, 20 billion there. And we have to reorganize our priorities. We have to make sure that we are putting those who are the least amongst us first in terms of how we think about our legislation and our policy. So I'm working on it. There are members who are working on it. There are legislation that we're working through to help deal with these kind of issues. And it is going to be a long journey, but we have to start somewhere. We're going to keep doing it. All right, this is going to be the last one.
Kind of mundane one.
A mundane one for the last one? Can you spice it up a little?
Follow-up on the long-term care.
Okay.
You said it's just ultra-wealthy and people in Medicaid. There's a middle group, people that bought long-term care policies that now essentially are being eliminated by the insurers. I have a policy, the rate has been tripled.
Right.
It went up 20% more recently. So they should be held, I know a lot of this is regulated at the state level, but I think there's some federal attention to it, which goes just to the broader issue of responsibility of these companies, even on issues that this woman just brought up.
So this is a great, I'm sorry, you want to finish? Did I interrupt you?
I'm done, thank you.
So the reason why the costs are running away from us, and this is a deeper issue beyond just the long-term home care piece, right? It's just the entire healthcare apparatus, okay? And this is a good question to end on, because what we're talking about is how we can hold these private insurance companies more accountable. Right now, they have a monopoly on the system, okay? They just do. Unless you qualify for TRICARE or you qualify for Medicaid or Medicare, millions and millions and millions of Americans are left beholden to the whims of the private insurance marketplace. And they have a racket going on. They run the table. So when we're thinking about what real change can look like, when we're thinking about the ways in which we can make them more responsive and fair when they begin to price their products and their services, I think we have to introduce a nonprofit actor into the mix. We've got to make sure that there's some type of public competitor in the marketplace, okay? No one's sitting here saying you have to close up your shops, private insurance folks. All we're saying is we're going to put a nonprofit actor in your midst, okay? And we're going to see how you react when there's a nonprofit actor in your midst. Will you continue to just unnecessarily drive up your premiums and your deductibles? Or will you have to correct to be able to remain competitive in the marketplace. That's what a public option does. By saying, if you like your private insurance, go ahead and keep it. But if you don't because it's killing you, well, there's a nonprofit actor over here. You can buy into Medicare, access the network and the drugs, right? And you better believe what's going to happen is more and more folks will have to make that choice and say, well, whatever's the most affordable option, I'm going to pursue. And the market will react accordingly. And the folks who do have private insurance, even if you like it, you'll benefit if you want to keep yours, because what's going to happen is the premiums will go down. Deductibles will go down. So everybody wins. And everybody who, we think ought to be winning, wins. But the private insurance marketplace, they're able to do business. They're able to continue. But what ends up happening is we create a more diversified marketplace that is more responsive and fair to the public. And last point on the healthcare piece, I really like the public option. I have a bill, the Medicare X Choice Act. I'm the only freshman member of Congress that's introduced a bill that can get us to universal health care through a public option, the only one. And what this bill does is it creates that option, allows Medicare to negotiate with the pharmaceutical industry, and once you have a public option in place, if you're an employer, right, you have, especially a small business, you have to be on the hook for a lot of those healthcare expenses. You're also beholden to the private insurance marketplace and its whims. How nice would it be if you're a small business owner to be able to look to the nonprofit actor to bring down your overhead? That's a big, big deal. And if you're an employee who feels like you can't get affordable health care if you leave your job and you're tied to your job as a result, right? You're chained there. You don't want to be there, but you have to be there because your health care is good enough for you. Well, now you're free, because now you might have a better option through a nonprofit actor in the marketplace, which creates more activity in the marketplace, more risk-taking in the marketplace, more investment. And that's how you grow the economy from the ground up. So, Medicare X Choice Act, we are working very hard on this bill. We got a lot of co-sponsors, and we're going to keep doing it. I want to just thank everybody. Thank you. Great start to town halls. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the attention. It really means a lot. And just really thank you for the warm reception. I really appreciate it. Thank you.